Welcome to the Real-Time Summit here at Spark FX Conference, an arm of ACM SIGGRAPH. Spark has had such an incredible demand for more content related to what's happening with real-time technologies across industries that we decided to dedicate an entire portion of the conference to the topic. Real-Time Summit is all about exploring the possibilities of real-time creation. We've curated a range of leading voices from a diverse selection of industries to help paint a vivid picture of what might be on the horizon when it comes to the use of these kinds of technologies, from on-set virtual hardware setups, interactive VR storytelling, to immersive concert productions. We've gathered some of the voices to generate curiosity and encourage exploration. We'll dig into the technical aspects of real-time production, break down the different technologies that are involved, explore the impacts of real-time on storytelling and character, and also talk about emerging partnerships. We want this summit to spark conversations about real-time and for us to understand the impacts that this kind of technology will have across creative industries. To do so, I'm pleased and excited to be here today with Larry Cutler of Baobab Studios and Paul Salvini with DNEG to get their take on some of the impacts of the use of real-time tools within their organizations and industries. Take two. To do so, I'm pleased to be here today with Larry Cutler of Baobab Studios and Paul Salvini with DNEG to get their take on some of the impacts of the use of real-time tools within their organizations and industries. Larry Cutler is co-founder and CTO of the Emmy Award-winning and leading VR animation studio, Baobab Studios, whose mission is to inspire you to dream and bring out your sense of wonder. Larry brings deep technical leadership over the past 20 years in the area of animation, creation, and development. Larry currently serves on the Digital Imaging Technology Subcommittee for the Oscar Technical Achievement Awards. He was most recently the Vice President of Solutions at Metanautics. Prior to that, Larry spent 10 years at DreamWorks Animation, where he served as global head of character tech and held several leadership positions in the areas of character development, animation workflow, rigging, and character simulation. Larry began his career at Pixar Animation Studios as a technical director on the films Monsters, Inc., Toy Story 2, and A Bug's Life. As DNEG's global CTO, Paul Salvini provides strategic and technical direction to the visual effects and animation company's global technology team, based on a deep understanding of the importance of the role of technology in storytelling. Paul has over 25 years of experience in technology leadership roles. As CTO of Side Effects, where he worked for 15 years, Paul oversaw the development of Houdini from beta onwards. As CTO of Christie Digital, he created and led the research and innovation and new business initiative departments and an advanced technology group. Most recently, Paul served as CEO of the Accelerator Center, where he helped launch and mentor 100 technology-based businesses working in a wide range of areas from data science, AI, computer vision, and probiotics to autonomous vehicles. Paul also has a strong academic research background. He holds a PhD and Master's of Science, specializing in the computer simulation of complex systems, as well as an MBA and a BMath in computer science. Wow. So attendees, you can refer to the Spark FX event website for full bio details. So how to start this discussion? We had a bit of preamble in terms of how we would do that. Here's a provoking question, and then we'll see how the conversation evolves. I'm really excited, again, to start this conversation and to get to know Larry and Paul a little more. So for both of you, and Paul, we'll start with you, what have been some of the most prominent impacts to how you approach projects and project development with the capabilities of real-time tools in mind? And you can make reference to specific projects as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, and a real pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to be here with Larry as well. Real-time is just is taking over in the film and visual effects world, really at an unprecedented rate. it is such an exciting time to be in this industry, to be able to see the impact that real-time technologies are having already and are about to have. They're fundamentally providing a new way for us to make films and tell stories, and really a new way to engage with our clients who are trying to tell very complex stories involving thousands of people that have to be on the same page. And it's amazing how we can start to use real-time technologies to aid that process and ultimately fundamentally change the way films are being made.
Wow. Yeah. And Larry, how about for you? What are some of those important aspects of real time and how Baobab is approaching creative dev?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, real time has fundamentally changed how we create our projects. But for us, we come from a computer animated feature film background, and we actually started Baobab 5 years ago to create stories in virtual reality where you are really part of the story. So basically, we can place you directly inside the story and really make it so that the worlds come alive, that the characters can acknowledge you in real time. You can actually have a role to play. And fundamentally, you can actually matter to these characters. You can matter, you can act on behalf of the characters that you're there with. And so real time is absolutely essential for that, because everything is alive. There's interactivity. The characters are responding based on what you do. And so for us, that was just a huge game changer, because on one hand, we were used to having character performances that are tightly hand animated, rendered overnight or over several hours. And then suddenly everything needs to happen in 11 milliseconds for both eyes. And so, but the immediate benefit on our first project, Invasion, is that we created this little bunny, Chloe, and she like hops up to you at the beginning, and she like tracks you. She looks you directly in the eye. And at that moment, audiences in a headset, people reacted in such crazy ways. They would like wave at Chloe, they'd hop around, and there was this immediate connection. Like, people thought Chloe was real because she was looking you directly in the eye, she was tracking you. And so even with this very simple interactivity, this presence of you being there in the world was fundamentally changing how people, how they reacted and what they would do. And so for Baobab, we've just been experimenting over the past 5 years in how to tell interactive narratives. And so it's kind of twofold. Like Paul was just talking about how real time enables your artist to actually be on the same page, to actually be iterating together in real time without having to wait 10 minutes or wait an hour to see results. And so that actually has been really profound change. But then for us, we have this other aspect, which is that fundamentally what we're creating is interactive. And so therefore, everything needs to be rendered in real time so that it can respond to you. And so, real time is just permissive in every single thing that we do, for both of those reasons.
That's fantastic. And I remember having conversations with Chloe, by the way, when I first saw Invasion. I was like,
well, it's kind of funny because a lot of people were like, it was amazing when Chloe mirrored what I was doing. And we were like, mirroring is this really powerful, like subconscious communication cue. But we didn't program that. That was just happenstance. We just happened to have an animation that matched what people were doing, or people were mirroring Chloe. But that was like, oh, we should do that. And so like in our next piece, we actually have a character that, would actually mirror what you do to build connection. So if you tilt your head to the left, and it'll tilt their head. And that's, like if you watch like Lovers, at its restaurant, and one, puts their hand like that, then like a couple seconds later, the other, and you don't even realize that you're doing that. And so it's those types of things that we really can kind of program in to these characters and really add sophistication and depth to them. And you feel that, like if you do something and a character doesn't respond, it immediately takes you out of the immersion. You're like, why did I just throw a burning log at this character and it didn't? It just continued on its monologue.
And for the nerds out listening here as well, so some of the technology to achieve that were built tools that Baobab created. Is that correct?
Yeah, we ended up, creating an entire platform. We call it our Storyteller Platform because it helps us tell stories. Which really started out as just this idea of, can we actually get feature film quality character performances that are running in real time? And then we added in all these AI components on top of it. But then it really just became this whole filmmaking suite. Like, how do you tell stories in VR from the very earliest storyboarding tools all the way down to how do we create a 2D, shoot a 2D film from the VR footage. And so we've just been slowly building these artist tools out on top of Unity, actually, so that, we can, create VR projects and, fully take advantage, and artists really focusing on their work as opposed to all the plumbing and pipeline that is associated with it.
Yeah. Nice. And Paul, good segue to you. So how have some of the tools that DNEG has been using, how are they helping your creative?
Yeah, so I mean, one great example would be the whole virtual production. The idea of, and part of virtual production is being able to film on a set with perhaps LED panels in the background instead of just a green screen. And much like Larry said, in terms of when you're in that immersive world and you're immersed in the actual environment, imagine the power for the actors in terms of now, instead of, just being surrounded by green screens and green tape and green everything, to actually be able to see and imagine the world that they're immersed in and the quality of performance that emerges from that. And also when you're doing visual effects and creating visual effects after the fact, you have to make them fit the performance. And that might not always match what somebody is looking for artistically. So to be able to create on set through the lens of the camera exactly what the final product is going to look like, you could just make much better creative decisions. And for the director, really knowing what he or she is going to get as well, which is incredible in terms of power of creative storytelling.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
it helps both.
Paul, we were so inspired by the work that you guys have been doing and seeing the power of virtual production. It's funny. It actually, for Baba Yaga, for our last piece, we were creating a 2D version from our VR project. And we were doing some interesting things to kind of keep it in a first person, what Eric, our director, calls an emotional POV. And so we actually, sort of were inspired to create a set of VR tools so that Eric could be the cinematographer. So he could be in a headset, kind of being able to shoot the camera in the way that, all of this virtual production allows you to do. It's obviously a slightly different problem set, but there's something that's really powerful about the key creatives, like the director, being able to be the cinematographer, to actually see everything, at once and be making changes and being really empowered, as opposed to having to go to reviews later and have that occur much later in the process. And so Eric actually shot our entire, he's credited as our cinematographer. He shot all of the camera work for our 2D version of Baba Yaga, which 5 years ago, I would never have imagined having a tool set that was capable and simple enough that, we could put a director in VR in remote sessions, because we were in COVID doing that. So the real time, I think it really has kind of enabled the, sort of key creatives and all of this decision making to occur much earlier in production, as opposed to waiting till post-production, let's say.
And I really, it's amazing to see how it's starting to change everything from previs to post-vis and pre-production and production planning. Just being able to scan locations, bring them into a virtual environment, interact with them in real time, plan out camera moves, say, this is the part that we, perfect, I finally have the shot I'm looking for. So when you actually do show up on location, should you decide to, you don't do it as a virtual production, should you decide, you know exactly what you're going to plan to do, exactly what camera angles, what lenses to bring. And it's just such a an amazing experience as a result. It really allows better creative decisions to be made faster. And quite frankly, that's been our passion for the last 30 something years in terms of creating technology for the film world is how do we do a better job of creating faster feedback for the artists and to get everyone on that same page. And it's just so neat to see how the technology is now really exploding in every part of the production pipeline.
Yeah. So I know that this was already underway pre-pandemic. What do both of you think? Has the pandemic accelerated this type of development? Would it have happened anyway? Do you have thoughts about that?
I mean, interestingly for us, it didn't, the pandemic had clearly had huge effects on, everyone personally. And we're, first of all, very fortunate that we could just continue doing our jobs, and we're not in live action or, or in other things. And so, but for us, it really didn't affect anything in a major way, because we were already using these real-time tools and systems, and we had already had established a pretty global workforce. And so we had already dealt with how do you have remote reviews in VR, how do you, all of these kind of distributed review processes and tech and tools, tool sets we had already developed, just because we had people in France and we had people in Poland and we had people in the Philippines, it's just the nature of work these days. And so it was actually a really seamless transition to working. I would say that the biggest thing is really has affected how we distribute our projects, at least, because VR is still in its infancy. A lot of the like Baba Yaga, we tend to show it at film festivals and events before we release it to the public, and those events have had to go all virtual. And so even something as simple as having a premiere party is the type of thing that you can't do anymore. And so we actually ended up creating a premiere party in VR, where, in Altspace, we created like a Baba Yaga event, and we had the two of our actresses, Daisy Ridley and Jennifer Hudson, actually were there in their avatars, and we had press, and it was, so it's forced us to be creative. But, I think the real time, it was already happening. I imagine Paul can add to, it probably has accelerated its use on the virtual production side, I would guess, but I'll let Paul speak to that.
Yeah, so absolutely, quite right, Larry, that for sure, COVID had dramatic impact on our industry, where everyone had traditionally been working in a studio to moving to working from home, which if you'd asked me a few years ago whether that would even be possible, I probably would have said not likely. But it's incredible how well, and kudos to all of our staff to have responded, and the industry in general to have responded the way they did, to allow us to continue as much as possible to work effectively. One of the big changes, though, is because it's hard now to get people to specific locations where you might otherwise want to shoot, it absolutely accelerated the interest and growth in virtual production and using real-time technologies so that you could bring the locations to wherever the talent could be, and use all the other tricks that we do to bring people together that may otherwise not have been able to shoot at the same time in the same location. But definitely being able to bring locations into a virtual environment and still be able to either complete films or even start new ones has been incredible. And I think that's definitely something that was accelerated by what happened in terms of the inability to actually get out there on location with talent and with staff.
I forgot one aspect that did change was actually voice record. So in animated films, you record actors and actresses in studios, and that suddenly became really, really difficult to do. And so we with Kate Winslet, who's one of the actors in Baba Yaga, she's in England, and we actually ended up having to record her in her closet. And so we have all this crazy, and so it took an incredible amount of effort to like get software to her and hardware, and like, and then she's in the closet because that's got like the best sort of sound, and so it has forced us to be creative, about certain things that you just wouldn't think about, for sure.
I love
but
that.
that has nothing to do with real time. That
Oh no, it does. Well, yeah, maybe.
but it has forced us, it certainly has forced us to rethink so many aspects that you just took for granted. Like you always go, we would always fly out to wherever the artist is and record them in a studio, and we've really had to rethink that, and we've survived. We've found ways to do that. So I imagine that will change fundamentally, like how it'll open up a lot more avenues for us to include artists that are in different locations and have different levels of availability, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, correct me if I'm wrong, that's emerged in the last year, and I don't know if I'm seeing this as necessarily accelerated. I think that when we start to work with innovative technologies and experiment and explore how they can impact storytelling, and Larry, you mentioned distribution and collaboration at a distance. What types of partnerships have been developing out of these ecosystems that both of you and your companies are creating?
I mean, with VR, what's been great for us is it's created like a level playing field where nobody knows what they're doing, and so for it's allowed us to have really interesting partnerships. Obviously, one of the first places that we've partnered with is with the game engines themselves, and so we've had a really strong partnership with Unity over the last 4 years, and that's been essential for us to be able to kind of get the most out of the engine, because we're really pushing Unity in ways that it had not been pushed before, and so that's been important. We've had growing partnerships with the studios. So for us, it's happened rather organically, but there's been a lot of interest in our content, not just from the distributors like Oculus. We've had lots of partnerships with Oculus and with Sony and with the major distributors, but also with the sort of mainstream media studios, because they've been able to put on a headset and really see these characters come to life. And then with Eric, our chief creative officer, was the writer and director for the Madagascar films and has this track record, then they suddenly are very excited about turning our projects into feature films or into TV series or book deals. And so we've kind of organically been slowly sort of setting up deals to be able to have our IP sort of cut across medium. And so Invasion, our first project, we signed a deal with Roth Kirschenbaum to turn it into a feature film not too soon after Invasion came out. And I that's in large part to just how this new technology and sort of new way of thinking, sort of new way of storytelling, it really engages people in a fundamentally different way. And so I think it's been able to get the mainstream, sort of media organizations very excited about what we're doing and about the stories we're creating.
And for us at DNEG, it's been huge in terms of partnerships and the relationships that we've been building. Virtual production and real-time technology is such an area of innovation for us. It's one where we're investing heavily in, because we understand it's the future of filmmaking. It's going to have a profound effect on our industry and impact for the creative good, the benefit of all. So you probably saw a press release with Dimension Studio and some of the work we're doing with the Unreal Engine and with Airy and Moses and 86 and Brompton and a few others, really to explore the future of filmmaking our creative director, Paul Franklin, recently finished directing a short film called Firework with Dimension, and phenomenal tool to really allow us to showcase what's possible to do with real-time technology. How do we have the best of both worlds, the best of real-time feedback to the filmmakers, combined with all the power of visual effects powerhouse that you can provide on the back end to create just an amazing creative result. So that was a very, very exciting project. And quickly on the backs of that, we have a number of other productions that are underway today using technologies that were developed for that short and during that short. So it's a huge area of innovation for us. We can't hire people fast enough, which is one of our challenges to work in this area, because we need people with skills that bridge real time with graphics and visual effects. And so if anyone out there is looking, I think Larry probably has the same opportunities. Just tremendous opportunities right now throughout the industry, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Is when you're breaking new ground, like for us we found out very early on that VR is not film and it's not a game. It really is its own entity. We assumed it was like, oh, you're just creating a film in 360, and we learned really quickly that's not true. And but what's interesting is that we've actually been bridging that sort of skill set of people from feature films, from visual effects, from computer animation and games, and who understand, the games people really understand real time specifically. And so over the past 5 years, it's really about bringing those two cultures together and understanding what that's going to look like in, for the types of stories we're telling. And I think it's the same for Paul of, how do you kind of marry these two, sort of ways of working in so that we're able to tell narrative stories to the best that we can. And that's what's really exciting. But it is hard to find those people, because you tend to get people who understand it for real time. You tend to get people who understand interactivity really well in games, but don't really care about the film side and the narrative side and the pushing, the look and all of those things. Or you get people who really understand that, but really don't understand how to do that in real time or what the benefits of that are. And so we've run into the same problems of we're obviously a much smaller studio, but finding those people who really can sort of bridge that gap and be excited about what we're doing and passionate. And I think at the end of the day, we tend to always look for like people who are good problem solvers and who are able to have a point of view, but then be able to take that and really go and do a wide range of things and aren't just sort of very narrow.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm sure it's also important for those watching to understand, well, how can we start conversations or continue them in terms of how to train people that might best fit your studios, and to be able to continue that dialogue. I don't think it's right here,
Yeah.
but yeah. And Paul, did you want to add anything to that?
No, well, other than just to say, I think what's exciting is to see people working with real-time technologies, with game engine technology. I think Epic's done just a phenomenal job of funding individuals and providing tools, really democratizing what's possible, putting assets out there for people to play with and things like that. That's exactly what it takes to seed the world with talented people who are passionate about doing things with real-time technology. So kudos to them for helping with that, for sure. And just learning how to use those tools. I think what's really amazing too is how I see a more collaborative approach to filmmaking emerging as well, which probably bridges the VR world, the gaming world, and everything else. I mean, we had a project the other day. I was seeing people lighting at the same time as somebody was animating, at the same time as somebody was doing layout, almost like you were all there working on the same set at the
Yeah.
same time, the way you would in a live environment, but they were doing this in a real-time virtual collaborative environment, and ironically from their individual homes around the world. So
Yeah.
how cool is that?
I do think that is the real promise of real time, and I think we've both seen that not just as a promise but in action, which is the idea that you don't just have to send something over a fence, and I think, at least in my production experience over time, everyone became very siloed, and there were like kind of these rigid processes, because there really was a huge disconnect between the work that you did getting to the next department, and they were done with different tool sets, and none of them were iterative and responsive. And in Unreal or other game engines, like you're literally, you have everything right there to do the full suite of production, and you can really have all your artists working in the same package but seeing the results immediately. And that's just such a huge change. The difference between seeing something in a half a second and seeing something even in 5 seconds or 10 seconds is game changing. And in many cases, it's much more than that order of magnitude change. And so it just opens up incredible possibilities to really rethink, how we tell these stories and how we create these projects. And at least from my experience, I also think we're probably at the very early stages of we've just scratched the surface. We like to say everything we do is an experiment, because it's just so early on that we know that we'll look 5 years down the road and be like, I can't believe we did it this way.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I love looking, and obviously, when I was at Side Effects, when we were developing Houdini, it was all about how do we create more sort of interactivity, better feedback, faster, et cetera, et cetera. I love seeing the interactivity that's been built into how, for example, Houdini connects with Unreal. The live link that's created between the two, how, properly, beautifully rendered visual effects can be brought into a live environment, sort of how procedurally you can generate very complex environments and things like that. It's the marriage of those two pieces of software that's just incredible. And the other thing that I think is great is, having worked in that world, I think it's inspired the team at Side Effects and the other DCC companies to think about how the rest of the workflows can also be more real-time, or at least faster, more collaborative. And that's exciting. That's really driving the software ahead as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. In my previous life at DreamWorks, we created this real-time animation program, Primo, which was basically a redoing of our animation system. You can think of it as a Maya-like system, but the whole goal was for it to be real-time. But it was this very bespoke system, so it's basically like we had this whole animation system that ran in real time, but it didn't interface necessarily. Now I'm sure now it does, but it didn't interface with anything else. And I think that's what's so amazing about Unreal and these game engines, is that you kind of have this whole foundation that is based on that's real time, and then now there's really these great live links into the DCCs that you like Houdini, that you're going to continue to use. So it just opens up that possibility of doing really complex things, even if you're doing it in Houdini, of then being able to bring it in and see those results immediately.
What I love about this discussion, because unless you've been part of development pipelines, or you've been part of different industries, from an outside perspective, it's difficult for people to understand how studios like yours push the technology to be developed that then they might have access to down the road. And that's an exciting story with Houdini. I'm looking at the real-time storyteller creator, Larry, with the Baobab as well. And I'm just wondering when that beta will be released so I can use it.
We'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah. So let's segue into futures. And you mentioned increasing collaboration, which is something we don't always talk about when we talk about future developments and technologies. But what do both of you see down the road for real-time technology and its potential to serve story and character and collaboration?
You want to go, Paul?
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, I don't want to oversell. So I don't want to oversell real time. I think that's probably the responsible thing to do, is to say, it's another tool. It's another tool that we're going to be able to use to really improve the quality of the content that gets created. So, I know everyone's dream is that everything in a film will be created in real time, and, et cetera, et cetera. But, in my now many years of experience, it still amazes me that an overnight render is still an overnight render.
Yeah.
And, really all that's changed is the incredible sophistication and quality of what's being rendered in order to, despite massively greater amounts of compute power, the complexity of the jobs have risen to match that compute power. So I don't think the non-real-time workflow, just as a, to make sure I get that out there, is being threatened in any way, shape, or form. But what is changing is, where possible, to allow people to, as I say, storytelling is a difficult process. Even if you know the story exactly that you want to create, well, that's a lot easier, because then you can communicate that, and it's pretty easy to get everybody on the same page. It's harder when there are gaps, and storytelling is such a collaborative process that working the story through the studio usually enriches the story. People have great ideas, creative ideas, things get added, and the story ends up getting strengthened by a great studio. And that's really the job. I think what real-time technology does is tightens that sort of iteration loop. It allows more people to impact the story in better ways, the storytelling in better ways. It allows every shot to sort of be certain to contribute to the film and the end product, or whatever you're creating, the creative vision of what's being created. And that matters. So I'm excited, because it doesn't just mean we're changing who does what, when, and with whom in terms of workflow, but it's fundamentally changing the quality of the product as well. Everything from the example I gave on virtual production to, which enhances actors' performance, improves the director's sense of what is ultimately going to be seen, to communicating to a collaborative team. It's all getting better, and that's such an exciting place to be. It's important, because if you look down the road for the next 5 years, it's an incredible amount of content that needs to be created. And there's no end of stories waiting to be told, which means all of the studios have to be hyper productive in terms of how much content we're going to be asked to produce. And that means better tools, really leveraging the technology of the day. And my hope is that by taking a leadership position in some of these areas, we can really chart a path that will help others who are trying to go down that road to learn from some of the things that didn't work so well, and really be able to hit the ground running and take advantage of what I think is an incredible new way to tell stories and make films. And so that's my hope for the future, is that it's going to be an exciting one. It's going to be one where we have, as I say, improved storytelling, and really an improved way of getting to that end product.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it from an interactive storytelling perspective and a interactive VR perspective. So we've really just scratched the surface of what's possible. But for us, what we've been excited about, real time has enabled us to tell stories just in fundamentally different ways than we were a few years ago. And how we've gone about it is that we've been really excited about creating that same empathetic connection that you get from a film, that you would expect from a character that you fall in love with. So those same characters and stories, but because you're there and you're part of that world, that you don't just feel empathy, but that you can be given the opportunity to actually act on that empathy, that you can, like a Baba Yaga, you're a main character in the story, that you can actually make choices that impact the ending, that, that you learn something about yourself. So in that way, we can create, compassion is really that idea of empathy plus action. And so we can create compassionate stories where you can actually participate and you can actually, be that hero character who has to make a really difficult decision under pressure that reveals something about yourself. And the real-time technology, as it improves and as it's probably more as we are able to harness it better, it allows us to make those moments believable, to make characters that are AI driven and emotive still have that same performance that you would expect from a handcrafted, hand animated character. And to really, sort of bring you into that immersive world and make that feel so real that, you can reach out and touch it. And so I think that's the real potential for, interactive and immersive storytelling in real time, is just this idea of where you can actually matter the world, you can actually participate in the story. And so that's what we've been really excited about. And again, all the things Paul said are incredibly true about, from a filmmaking side, the idea of being able to collaborate and to iterate much quicker, especially in those areas of gaps, is really been exciting for us to see. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that. We're unfortunately we have had to have a mindset where everything we do has to run in real time. so we've had to do away with the offline side of it that we were so used to. But that I think is an incredibly bright future for being able to tell stories in different ways because of real-time technology. And I think that that's what's inspired, the roots of our company in terms of, how we go about telling stories.
Wow. Well, I'm inspired. And first of all, thank you both so much for taking time out of, I know, busy schedules to be with us. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Larry. And thanks to the SparkFX team for setting Real-Time Summit up and allowing us to get a lot of amazing insights from both of you today.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Patrick. A pleasure.
Welcome, everyone, to Spark Real-Time Summit, exploring the possibilities of real-time creation. I'm excited to be here today with Larry Cutler of Baobab Studios and Paul Salvini from DNEG. This is a follow-up to a pre-recorded conversation that some of you might have already seen. It's a moderated session that gives you an opportunity to ask questions of Larry and Paul. And I will give you quick bios of each of them before we begin. Larry Cutler is co-founder and chief technical officer of the Emmy award-winning and leading VR animation studio, Baobab Studios, whose mission is to inspire you to dream and bring out your sense of wonder. Larry brings deep technical leadership over the past 20 years in the area of animation creation and development. He currently serves on the Digital Imaging Technology Subcommittee for the Oscar Technical Achievement Awards. He was most recently the Vice President of Solutions at Metanautics. Prior to that, Larry spent 10 years at DreamWorks Animation, where he served as global head of character tech and held several leadership positions in the areas of character development, animation workflow, rigging, and character simulation. Larry began his career at Pixar Animation Studios as a technical director on the films Monsters, Inc., Toy Story 2, and A Bug's Life. Welcome, Larry. As DNEG's Global Chief Technology Officer, Paul Salvini provides strategic and technical direction to the visual effects and animation company's global technology team, based on a deep understanding of the importance of the role of technology in storytelling. Paul has over 25 years of experience in technology leadership roles. As CTO of Side Effects, where he worked for 15 years, Paul oversaw the development of Houdini from beta onwards. As CTO of Christie Digital, he created and led the research and innovation and new business initiative departments and an advanced technology group. Most recently, Paul served as CEO of the Accelerator Center, where he helped launch and mentor over 120 technology-based businesses working in a wide range of areas from data science, AI, computer vision, and probiotics to autonomous vehicles. Paul also has a strong academic research background. He holds a PhD and a Master of Science specializing in computer simulation of complex systems, as well as an MBA and a BMath in computer science. You can get the full event website and their bios on the SparkFX site. So, kicking things off, first of all, if you are joining us, then feel free to offer questions you might have in the midst of this conversation, or in terms of something you already saw and experienced through the pre-recorded moderated interview before. I'm going to start us off with a question about the audience or user experience. We didn't really get to this in the pre-recorded interview, but I thought I'd start off with Larry in terms of wondering how real-time technologies might be also influencing how your creative teams think about the audience now. What's different? Who is that audience? And maybe the tougher question to ask, but a good one, is how do we increase that audience over time? Larry, take it away.
All right. No, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with Paul and with you, Patrick. And it's an excellent question. So, from the very beginning of our company's formation 5 years ago at Baobab, we were really intrigued with the idea of placing you as the audience directly inside the story. So the idea of, instead of you going to a theater, watching something up on the big screen, which we all love, we're all filmmakers but being able to place you in the world where in VR, its superpower really is immersion, where we can place everything around you. We can have, characters that react to you in real time. And ultimately, we can give you a role to play in these stories. And so that was really what we set out to do. And if anything, we really underestimated the power of real time and the power of VR to really make you, not just a passive observer in these stories, but really giving you the potential to be an active participant. So from a creative process standpoint, it affects everything that we do, all the way from the very early foundations of forming the story. So, when our writer and director, Eric Darnell, when he starts thinking of a story idea, he not only is thinking through what are all the characters in the story, what are their arcs, he's actually now thinking, what's your character in the story as the audience? What's your arc? How are you going to interact and participate in the story? And, we may be telling a story where you don't have a role, but so far we've been really excited about this idea of giving you a role to play where you are, either a physical or some embodiment of a character in, in the VR pieces that we've created. And so from there, then everything kind of emanates out of, now we have a story that can be highly interactive, where you actually have choices to make, and those choices have consequences, and you actually can build a relationship with another character. You can act on their behalf. And so it just opens up this huge, wealth of possibilities. And, ultimately the audience experience is just a very distinct one. And I think one of the things we learned really early on is that VR as an entertainment medium is very different from what we've done before, from film and from games, because you really are there. And if we take advantage of that, then, we can create an experience for the audience that's very unique and unlike anything that you've done before.
That's great, thanks. And in terms of one of your creations for VR, Baba Yaga, who is the user audience in that story?
Yeah, so our latest piece that we've created is Baba Yaga, which you may remember from if you're familiar with the Eastern European fairy tales. And in our reenactment of Baba Yaga, which is this potentially evil witch. You are the older sibling to Magda. So your name is Sasha, which is be either boy or girl, depending on how you take that on. And the two of you, venture into this enchanted forest to find a magical witch blossom to save your mother, who's very sick. And ultimately, that forest is, that's Baba Yaga's forest, and you end up encountering Baba Yaga. And your choices really have meaningful consequence. You're actually the hero character in the story. I think that's one of the big things that we've evolved on over the course of our journey. Is in our earlier pieces, we made you like a side character, and you kind of had this entree into the world. But because we were really grappling with good stories are really about you have a character having to undergo difficult decisions under pressure and make a really difficult choice that reveals something that's so inevitable about themselves. And so in Baba Yaga, you are actually the person who has to make a difficult decision under pressure that reveals something about yourself. And so that has, as we've become more comfortable and as we've started telling more expansive stories, we've really liked the idea of placing you front and center in the experience and really giving you the power to change the outcome of our story.
That's great. Yeah. Now, Paul, while audiences for some of the projects you've been involved in and supporting may not necessarily have that type of immersion, I'm still wondering how the real-time technologies are providing your creative teams with options for audiences that they're becoming more familiar with visual effects and characters and digital environments. So maybe you can speak to that and some of the affordances that these new technologies are providing your teams.
Yeah. So most of the products that we deliver are not interactive products. They're, full feature animations or feature film visual effects. But really, real time, it's about, our audience is those who are making the film. It's about, in many ways, similar to what Larry talked about, creating this incredible virtual environment that you can explore in a collaborative way. And for a storyteller, being able to, for example, take a storyboard and bring it to life, to be active in the creation of what otherwise might be somebody else creating a pre-visualization, really turning what is an iterative process, moving back and forth between different people and creating a new way of working that allows people to collaborate on the creation of a creative product. It really is about creating that amazing virtual environment that may have been brought and it may actually take a physical location and bring it into a virtual environment and then be able to explore creative possibilities within that. So in some ways, it's a very similar process. It's just a process being done in the job of building a film or telling a story. And so we get to enjoy that same as creative people. We get to enjoy that same exploration of creative potential. And then as a result of that, be able to very easily share what that end vision is going to be artistically or creatively.
That's great. We have a question that's come up. I just wanted to not forget this other one, though, that I know you'll both want to address too, that kind of popped out of what you've both just said. And I'm just wondering, you see how technologies are being more experimented with, even on Netflix, giving the audience a choice in terms of, oh, well, how would you like to end this? And now I know it's in VR that interactivity is more built into the experience, but still we're seeing these new types of hybrid types of storytelling. So Paul, maybe do you think that this is another aspect of the technologies that are being played with? Like are storytellers going there? Is that the future?
For sure they are. And I think it might not be the near future, but you can definitely see the elements of technology coming together to be able to create definitely forms that are much less linear than we have today, to explore not just the sort of create your own adventure type, forking narrative, but to really, imagine being able to, whether it's biofeedback to create a scene that's scarier than, that's personalized to you. We even see examples of some incredible work being done in terms of, in one of the latest video games that was released, Cyberpunk, by, targeting, for example, taking native language performances and then using the audio to drive the character's performance. So you're starting to see great examples where different audience members will experience content differently. And that's enormously exciting. So you can definitely see those worlds one day coming together. The games world is always played with an interplay between, cut sequences that tells, with story elements, and then the actual interactive portion. And of course, at some point in the future, this will all be one live, really incredible entertainment experience, but we're a ways off from that. But wow, so exciting to imagine the possibilities. A little scary, but really exciting.
Nice. Larry, did you have any?
I was, to sort of build on what Paul's saying. I think games have really understood this, the power of interactivity and how amazing that is for many, many years. And but one of the things that we've found is that we've brought together people who kind of have film perspectives, really strong narrative perspectives, and people who have really strong games perspective. And this interactive narrative, it's this idea of telling interactive stories, is something that is really quite distinct from both of those. It certainly borrows from both of those worlds. But typically, film people don't understand interactivity at all, and game people really don't understand story to the same degree. And so we've really enjoyed kind of bringing those two worlds together and forcing everyone to actually, talk to each other. And that's been one of the big, over the last 5 years, that's what our studio has really been doing, is building up the kind of creative and technical abilities to be able to tell those types of stories. And obviously VR is the most sort of extreme and sort of like on crack version of this, where everything's unfolding around you and you're there. But even in some of the interactive TV stuff that we're seeing is really exciting, even with very simple interfaces. And so as Paul said, you start out with something like Bandersnatch, which has real choose your own adventure quality to it, but there's a lot more that can be done even with these very simple sort of simple set of controls that you have. And so I think you're just seeing, a real exciting time to be able to sort of push on those, in a variety of distinct mediums.
Nice. That's great. Yeah. Well, related to that and related to the team thing and building the capacity in your team, a question here is, as CTOs, you're in a pivotal role to drive the technological strategies of your organizations. So how are you empowering your people to get on board with real-time technology adoption? Whew. All right.
I can go first. That's a terrific question.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I think the most important thing that a CTO can do is set the long-term technical vision for what you're trying to achieve as an organization. And it's a lot about talking about the why and the where. And what you really want is everyone to then be able to think about different ways that in their roles they can make a change to advance you towards that longer term vision. For us, we're blessed with the ability to look pretty far down the road, and we're also blessed with the ability to have a leadership position in really trying to change the way that films are made. And so, one of the things we have is the luxury of time to explore new ways of working with creative people who are leaders in really wanting to try new things and try new technologies. I think in terms of actually getting the staff on board, we rely on a pretty incredible training department that has been really busy in bringing new real-time technologies, introducing them to the various departments. showing the possibilities of today. And what that does is when you sort of combine what's possible today and speak to a vision of where we want to head in the future, I think that's where things get really exciting. And I'll just say, for me, the most important thing we can do as technology leaders is make sure that when we introduce new technologies, we don't just use it to do what we always used to do in the same old way, but just a little bit better. We look for those opportunities to say, can this actually change the way we work? Can this change, how we work? And that's the exciting part. And that's where I think each and every person in the organization, really, we count on to think of those creative ways to make us better and suggest things that will advance us towards ultimately where we're trying to get. So that's sort of the approach: high level vision backed up by lots of training, and then practical chances to apply it with different projects that are really, I think, at the leading edge of what's happening today.
Great, thank you. Larry, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Paul's saying in terms of as a CTO, you really are setting that long-term vision. For us, it's a little bit different in the sense that we're a small startup company, and so in terms of how the real-time vision, that was a necessity from day one. And so in fact, most of us actually did come initially from the film world, where we were able to kind of have things rendered offline, and we had 20-year-old processes and pipelines that we helped develop. And the luxury in our sense of being a small startup company is we didn't have all of this like baggage in the way we did things. We started from scratch, and so we're able to envision what a real-time pipeline from the ground up is, because we had to invent it in order to tell our stories. And so that's been the real exciting thing about being able to kind of set a vision where you kind of by necessity have to push the boundaries of what's possible and not do things the old way, just because it has to run at 90 frames a second on a headset or on a mobile device. And so that over time that has really evolved into into a full pipeline and full set of tools. I think the thing I would say is that one of the things that was always kind of hit home to me from my early days at Pixar is this idea that the art and science are always there to serve the creative. And so if you just have technology for technology's sake, then you end up with something that's a really cool tech demo, but it actually doesn't stand as a piece of content. And so I'm always very respectful and thoughtful of that, where we're actually mapping out what we want to do in conjunction with the stories that we tell and what's going to be most meaningful to the creative so that they can tell their stories in a better way. And to make sure that, our technology vision really aligns with the projects that we're doing and aligns with the stories that we want to tell. And so in many ways, we always have to kind of, sort of do this dance where you're sort of steering a big, well, in our case, it's a pretty small ship, but you're steering a ship, but it's kind of reacting to each project. And for us, we really view everything as an experiment. So each of our projects is just this experiment where we're going to try something out. And sometimes we actually go off in one direction on one project because it's really interesting to that story. And on another, we might go in a totally different direction. And then come back to things. And so we have this like laundry list of like, ooh, that was cool, I want to explore that further. And then we hope to find the story to support that. And then, obviously, I think as a CTO and as, someone on our leadership team, a lot of what we do is communication and sort of restating the vision and getting everyone aligned. And when people want to bail on something because it's, it seems like it's not going to work, kind of, sort of keeping the party line and helping people to, to sort of push through. And, I think that gets underestimated, is just the amount of time that you really spend making people see that long-term vision, and then how what we're doing in the short term is actually contributing to that.
Well, great. Yeah. Fantastic. You know, it makes you think in terms of the experimentation, in terms of advancing technology in your organizations. What is this balance then that both of you try to achieve working with your teams in terms of, you know, that working with third-party technology creators to support vision versus creating tools in-house? You know, there's this fine balance in order to, when you're trying to push story, when you're trying to push vision and technology, sometimes it's there, yeah, sure, but then it's like it's trying to catch up to what you're pushing. And so yeah, so Larry, maybe starting with the tool that you guys developed, I'm curious, like that balance, right?
So you know, for us, because we are a small, you know, 20, 30 person team, you know, obviously we have what I consider great engineers, but we don't have a ton of them. You know, we're just a really small team. And so for us, anytime that we can have a third party or someone else provide us with functionality that we don't need to write ourselves, we will happily take that. You know, and what we've unfortunately found is that when you're pushing on something that really hasn't been done, oftentimes there's huge gaps in what is there. And so when we started out Baobab, you know, we looked at our first project and we were like, I want to see, can we build a character that is really empathetic? Can you fall in love with a character the way you would on a feature film, but that's right there, like that I'm interacting with? Like that was our question to ourselves. And when we looked at all of the VR projects circa 2015, we didn't see that connection. And even when we look at some of the best AAA games, that's not that they couldn't do it, it's just that's not been the focus. And we kind of pushed ourselves like, hey, what would it take to actually achieve that? And there really just wasn't any software. And when we did, you know, like a pretty detailed analysis of what it would take to have a fleshy, empathetic little bunny named Chloe, we ended up having to build a whole new system to support that. And then as we've pushed on our projects, and so that was kind of like our early version of what had become our Storyteller platform, was just how do you have these feature film quality characters, but that are running in real time and reacting to you. But, you know, again, if, you know, even a simple example, if someone had implemented subdivision surfaces in, you know, that run at 90 frames a second, I would have happily we would not have implemented it ourselves, but here we are. And, you know, we really needed to, you know, sort of push the boundaries on that. And so with each project, you know, we're trying to get by doing, you know, really focusing on the one or two things that are key, because we have limited resources. And I think, you know, that's something that we have learned, is that it's very easy to have a much bigger appetite than we can swallow, and that, you know, than we can afford. And how do you actually pick your battles? And so, you know, we tend to say with each project, like, you get one really cool thing that we're going to focus on. And of course we end up with like 3 or 4, like we never do one because we're ambitious. But if we try to focus on a few key things that are important to pushing this project forward, then that overall pushes our long-term vision forward. But it does mean that we actually then cut corners, or we actually like avoid some other problems, so that we don't try to boil the ocean with each project we're creating.
Wow. Great. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, and I'd have a similar answer. I mean, we obviously rely on our DCC partners, the software providers, to not only provide the, you know, the tools that we use on a daily basis, but, you know, to be in constant communication with them to understand roadmaps and where those tools are heading, and to be true partners in helping to shape those tools to make sure that they not only will meet our studio's needs, but really all of the studios that are trying to push the envelope of what's possible to create. And so we take that role really, really seriously. I think what that does, though, even if you have a lot of developers, you never have enough. So to Larry's point, we have to absolutely pick and choose. So, you know, we tend to pick the you know, R&D type projects on things that are really going to matter for a particular project. You know, a great example might be on Interstellar from 2014. where our team worked with Kip Thorne in order to create a gravitational renderer to be able to render, a photorealistic black hole, because we can't expect the, you could ring up side effects and say, hey guys, could you please throw in a black hole renderer? I think lots of people are going to want that in the future. It's like, it's one of those things that really is specific to a project. And so there's a great example where we are able to not only pick and choose, but put the right amount of care and effort into a show to not only deliver sort of a great visual result, but to make sure we go the extra mile in getting the science right so that people can actually enjoy what is as real as it can get in terms of a properly thought through rendered black hole. And so it's things like that that I think are awesome. We definitely rely on the partners to provide the basics. Clearly, we have to provide a lot of pieces that glue it together. There's always a feature missing. I think the challenge is you develop something and then a year later, it's in the tool that, because you asked about it. You said, hey, nice. Can you do such and such? He said, no, we can't do that. And so you go and develop something yourself. And then lo and behold, a year later, everyone can do it. And that's okay. That's part of, and as much as we can give that code or give those ideas as well back to providers, that's what lifts the industry. That's what allows our industry today to be so productive compared to where we were 5, 10, 15 years ago. Just so many more features that have been democratized and put in the hands of every artist. And it's pretty amazing to see what's possible now.
Yeah. Wow. And I just add I think it's just such a really good point that, especially thinking of it from a, sort of small startup perspective, 20 years ago, there weren't the DCCs weren't in the same state. And so you really had to build, if you want an animation system, you had, you had to kind of build it yourself or, or you're working. And so, a lot of early studios really did build a lot themselves. And that meant that you really had a huge overhead to actually start up your company just to get to table stakes. And now with Unity, with these game engines, with the modern DCCs, with what Paul's done at Houdini prior, it really is such an amazing starting point. And these systems are highly extensible so that you can actually build all of your custom work that is specific for your gravitational renderer, your black hole renderer, and really fit it in a really modern way, and so I think that is critical, for us to be able to tackle these new challenges like VR or, really embedding real time in a full production pipeline. It makes it doable.
Yeah, and are you both finding over the years that there's a increase in the thirst for collaboration with and different partnerships that are forming? Is that on the increase generally? Would you say?
I've always liked that. I mean, that's always been, I've always been a collaborative person. And so I don't know that I've seen that change. I think what maybe has changed is recently with real-time technologies, just a continued increase or a rapid increase in the way we collaborate and thinking about the approach to filmmaking. And that's, to me, what's so exciting about what's happening right now in our industry, and why I think it's one of the most exciting times to be in our industry, is we really are pushing the art form through technology, and that's great. Larry said it really well. It was all at the end of the day, we're all here to create great creative content. It's all about enabling storytelling. It's about telling more compelling stories. I think it's about also telling stories in better ways as well, and in different and new ways. So with that in our hearts and sort of the technical pieces in our minds, I think there's never been a more exciting time.
Yeah, I would say that in the early parts of my career, I started kind of as the CG industry was just starting to to really expand, and it really was this pretty tight-knit community, and no one was at PDI or at at Pixar in the early days thinking like, this is how I'm gonna like get rich. It was really about like, can we actually tell this story? Like, how do we do this? And nobody knew, and anyone you could collaborate with, you would. And I think for VR specifically and for immersive technology, and I think this is also true with just real time and filmmaking, as Paul said, it again feels like those early days where it's a really small, tight-knit community. Everyone wants to help each other out. And, kind of it's like we all are in this together. And if we're successful, then, we're all going to benefit from that. And so that's what I really like about this point in time, is that you have, sort of a really big change in technology and in real time as a technology. You also have all these changes in terms of what's possible in terms of storytelling. And so it's just a really, it's a perfect storm, as well as all the stuff, going on with COVID and with streaming wars and all these other things. It's a perfect storm, for sort of a new kind of revolution in filmmaking. And so that has created, that feeling again of a really small community that just wants to help each other out. I do think, again, as we talked about with these DCCs and with open source and with all these other things, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, it was much harder to collaborate because there was so much that was proprietary. It was like everything was proprietary. Whereas now, so much of that is opened up, and studios have had to work with each other on films, with multiple studios working together, that it's just much easier. I think, everyone's at least I think both Paul and myself are natural collaborators. So, but it's much easier to do that and, to do that effectively.
Great. Wow. I was thinking related to this. I come back to the end user, to our end audience. And I'm just wondering, like, that relationship of pushing technology, like in VR, for example, Larry, it's like, it's sometimes the FPS is golden, right? Okay, we've got these constraints. How can we be creative with these constraints? And so I'm interested in that, in your roles, that balance between pushing the technology, but then also being able to understand, well, we're at a particular limitation in terms of reaching the audience, the end customer, and working with the partnerships as well. And so how do we achieve that balance? So I'm just curious about what goes through your lives in terms of that. Are you like scope every day? Or do you push the teams? Like, how do you guys manage that? Because it seems dizzying to me.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting, it's a great fine line. I mean, I think, one of the things that we've learned is that it's important to understand your audience and the technology you're building for up front. And so probably the biggest kind of moment of that for our studio was when we started working on our project called Bonfire. And that was the first project, we started it in 2018, and we were targeting these mobile headsets that ultimately became the Oculus Quest that were coming out in the middle of 2019. So we were looking at stuff that was about 18 to 24 months out in the future. And, our projects are pretty small in terms of short, they're happening over, several months to a year, but not over many years, like working on a film. But we knew that was super important to us, because the idea of not being tethered to a high-end PC with cables and with sensors and all this stuff, which, was just immediately like made it like a hardcore gamer and also just very, early adopter, that these mobile headsets were going to be the future. But that meant we were rendering on a mobile phone. So basically your 4-year-old Snapdragon processor, that was kind of like the specs that we had. And we were used to at least being able to render in real time on the highest end PC. And so with this project, that was one of our goals that we set out. But because that was a huge change, that meant like an order of magnitude less, graphics, less pixels, less interactions, less character, everything. But because we knew that constraint up front, we were able to design a world and design everything to work within that constraint. And so we didn't want it to just look cheap, which is generally, if you look at, games on a mobile phone that are, sort of 3D games on a mobile phone, that's generally what you get. No shadows, no, all those things. And so because we were very clear up front, we wanted that, and we wanted building a connection that became the basis for Bonfire. It would have been much harder to do later on. And so I think that is, for us, if we know what we need to fit in terms of a box up front, whether that's dollars, whether that's, compute power, what have you, then we can design a world. And that being said, we're always pushing the boundaries of it. And so that scoping is a constant problem at our studio, but it's a constant. I've never worked on a project that hasn't had that day to day, week to week, month to month balance of what's the most that you can get on screen. And I think that certainly with using real-time technology, the hope is that over time that actually allows us to tell stories in more efficient ways so that we can maximize, at least from a dollar standpoint, what we're getting up on screen. But I think filmmakers will always take advantage of every last dollar and cent, every last pixel, every last processor that they have at their disposal. And so even with the best intentions and the best process, you're always going to have those difficult scoping conversations, and you're always going to be at the boundaries of what's in scope and what's out of scope. And, so that becomes a production problem. And it's just another axis, for us is another axis is the rendering side of like, even if we could spend $1 billion, if it doesn't render in this amount of time. So, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's great. There was a quick wanting to have context for Bonfire in terms of what you just mentioned from one of the attendees.
Yeah. So Bonfire is a project that the premise is that you are part of the Space Force, and we've destroyed Earth, which doesn't seem so far-fetched, and we're looking for other planets to basically bring all the Earthlings over because we've had to leave Earth. And so you crash land onto this alien planet, and you've broken your legs, and you're at this camp. You have this campfire. You have your sidekick Debbie, who's this robot who's trying to take care of you, and you start hearing rustling in the forest around you, and all of a sudden you see these eyes looking right at you. And so ultimately it's about what happens when you are encountering this alien creature, which we call pork bun, because it looks like a little pork bun with legs. And the main purpose of this project is that you have to build trust and connection with an alien creature. And so is the two big things for us is one, it had to render in mobile VR. And the other was that we had to have this AI character that is really responsive to everything you do. And so, the interactivity was front and center in this project. It was totally nonlinear. It was, what happens if you take you have like a fire. So what happens if you take a log, you put it in the fire, and then you throw it at Debbie? She better react as opposed to just continuing saying her monologue. And so everything you could do has to be active the whole time. And so it was, I think that was our first taking all of the lessons we had learned from our previous projects and kind of wrapping up and applying it. I think we ended up doing it very successfully. And, for us, really the end goal is that you really feel like you're interacting with Pork Bun as a character and not some robot. And that was the thing that was hardest for us to do.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. And just to, again, contextualize that in terms of what Larry said before, all of those affordances that you're going to want to have as a creative team are impacted by the technology that and the constraints that you have. But also there's that push to see, in a way, what can we get away with the technology we have, which is. And
so, so with that project, when we started out, we said that it had to work on these 3 degree of freedom headsets, like the Gear VR with like one controller that doesn't track your hand. And so we eventually moved away from that, but there's still elements of the design that actually had to work within that context that you can see, if you look at our core mechanic, it actually would work with a 3 degree of freedom device, because that's what we designed initially. So those affordances and, the platforms that you're running against, have big impacts in terms of, the sort of user experience that you would go through.
Nice. Paul, did you want to add to anything that Larry was mentioning?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously in the filmmaking world, it's the land of constraints. There's never enough people and time and definitely never enough render power, no matter how big your render farm is. It is incredible to see how that world has changed. And, I think understanding the constraints of the day and how they change over time and is really important. I think what's fascinating is to see how people have used the advances in technology and in capability over time. Had you asked me 25 years ago how long it would take, I would think we're making films in real time and everything's rendered in real time. Because when you look at the technology, it's so much faster today than what we would have had in the 90s, early 90s, that like, wow. However, what's changed is actually the complexity of what we work on, the realism of what we're working on. And so we've used that complexity in some really interesting creative ways to enhance the narrative, to improve storytelling, and to allow stories to be told that otherwise wouldn't have been easy to tell. But I think the most interesting thing about the whole world I'm in is living within the constraints of the day. It's like, how on earth am I going to make this film with all of those, whether it's time or how many characters and a crowd you're able to work with, and or the render times, things like that. That's half the battle, and half the fun is really planning, because everybody wants more time to explore creative alternatives, and everyone's heart is to create the perfect film, and you're always having to to move on and keep things within a certain box of time. And that's the magic, I think, of filmmaking is that world of constraints. But I just think it's fascinating to see how the use of constraints as technology improves sort of changes over time. That's been amazing.
Yeah. I almost feel like we should start to have crash parties when the computers crash, instead of everyone going, oh, and instead of the first question being, did you save your work? It should just be like celebration. Look, we pushed technology today.
Exactly.
I will say one of the biggest advances in 25 years is that when you crash, is that 25 years ago you'd better saved your work, and now everything auto saves, and it's much. It seems like our work is much safer than it used to be. Although the number of crashes, I'm not sure if that's fundamentally changed.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so there's other stories, probably, questions coming in. We're getting close to wrapping, so I want to be sure of time. So there's a question probably, when it comes to VR storytelling, what tricks do you use to guide the player in the right directions that you want them to take? Do you also allow optional timelines and plots like RPGs? So Larry?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. It's funny because Eric, our director, often gets asked, like, hey, how do you feel as a director losing control of the story? And Eric would say that, and I think it's something that we all take to heart, that he doesn't feel like he's losing control. It's just a different set of techniques, a different set of tools, and a much different problem. And his goal ultimately is still oftentimes to get you to look exactly where he wants you to look at exactly the right time, even though you have full agency in the world. And so it's just different. And so, we have over time started to build up kind of like a set of techniques so that, we can actually get you to do the right thing, or to look the right place, or to be, sort of going down the path that we would like you to take. There's often other times where we really want you to have that agency and to be able to make your own choices, or to be able to play with stuff and have it seamlessly fit into the story that we're telling. And so I think that that's one of the other things that's evolved to the point about having subplots and other things, is that I think as our stories have become more sophisticated interactive wise, then it really is about the choices you make, having consequence, so that if I do something, there should be a consequence for it, and really being impactful. And then the other thing is like in the Bonfire example, where anything, if I give you a fire, it's kind of like the checkoff. If you have a loaded gun in scene 1, it better go off in scene 3. If I have a fire and I have a log, you better, every permutation of what you could do with that log and that fire better make sense throughout the piece. And if suddenly the log doesn't catch on fire because it's not convenient, that's where the immersion goes away. And so, just to kind of show some really simple things, one of the things that we learned in our first project was just from like magicians, where magicians are actually really good at getting you to look where they want you to look in misdirection. And so we actually started reading up on like, what do magicians do? And so the idea that if you want someone to look at you, you look at that person. Whereas if I want someone to look up at this object, I look up at it, and then you don't see what I'm doing with my hand, in the back. And so, on Invasion, we started using Chloe, the bunny's eye contact to really lock you in. So you're like looking right at Chloe, she's looking right at you, and then she looks up in the screen and you look up with her, and that's where you see the spaceship. And what's interesting is in that project, getting the audience to look at a spaceship up in the sky was the hardest thing to get audiences to do. And so a lot of user testing, we showed it to thousands of people, and but ultimately, we thought just having spatialized sound would be enough. And what happened is people would look up too early, not see the spaceship, and then start looking around, and then the spaceship would come. But by this point, they're like off looking over, So our like assumptions and kind of our natural instincts aren't right in the same way, like you build those up in watching films and in creating films, and they're just very different. So over time, we've kind of built up a set of tools in our toolbox to be able to do that effectively. And then also knowing when to kind of let the reins down. And it is kind of this dance that we play of, how do we manage that interactivity? When do we really want to lead you? And when do we actually want to pull back and let you explore?
Nice. Yeah, thanks. And Paul, don't worry, there's a question coming your way. And it's one that I've been wanting to get to, but I didn't want to push. So I'm glad that an attendee has provoked it, but it has to do with training. It has to do with someone who wants to enter these industries, right? There's a very specific question in terms of software, and sure, and Houdini, and you might be able to respond to that. Like, should I learn that? Should I learn UE? And perhaps that's a great kickoff to, and being an educator and in education myself. So how can we prep to enter these industries now? What are for both of you, what are some of the things you're seeing, or what's attractive to new entrants into this industry?
Great question. Thank you for that. So what I'll say first of all is I think most of the companies that are creating either DCC software or game engines are now exploring ways to enable people to learn the software in that context. And the specific combination you talked about of Houdini and Unreal Engine is certainly would make you very attractive at DNEG as a hire. So you probably couldn't go wrong with those two. And there really are, and there's live link that connects Houdini to the Unreal Engine, and that allows you to create content in Houdini and have that appear immediately in Unreal. That would be a pretty powerful combination, I would say, if those were the skills you were learning. Assuming there wasn't some other glaring horrible thing about you, that would be a great combination to get you into the industry, as both of those skills independently are in high demand, and those skills together, you'd be in quite an elite group, and so worthy. But I will say it's exciting to see the education sector embrace the whole idea of virtual filmmaking and virtual production, and to see the quality of educational materials and programs that are now emerging to help people, because it's a lot. Learning Houdini is a lot. Learning Unreal's a lot. Learning both of them is quite a formidable challenge, and so we appreciate those who embark on that. The other thing I would say is people who are passionate about creating those experiences on their own, who have made a project as a byproduct of their passion for doing work in this area. And I think I love the fact that these tools are really starting to democratize who can create content in that way, because both are available in a free version and for enthusiasts to just learn. And that's just awesome. So quick answer, yes, absolutely. Great combo.
Yeah, I would just like to build upon what Paul said about passion, and just, you know, ultimately, I think the thing that we look for are people who really, in some form or another, you know, want to tell stories and or be part of building that filmmaker's tool set. So it's not necessarily, if you're, you know, one of our R&D engineers, is not necessarily a prerequisite that you've gone and made your own short film. But what we have found is that the people we tend to hire, are really good problem solvers, even across the spectrum, just because you have to wear lots of new hats when you're pushing on new technology and new frontiers. But they also do have this passion, like they really do care about the types of things that we're creating. And that seems to be this common thread, you know, and especially in a startup environment where there's often, you know, you're doing everything. So you're never going to just be in a pure like research. You're always going to be delivering something that an end artist is going to be using. And so you tend to have people who really have that kind of passion one way or another, whether it is on the artistic side, people who really aren't just interested in, you know, learning Unreal Engine or the ins and outs of Houdini, but really want to create stuff in it and are using it to tell their stories or to create cool art or whatever that may be. And then on the engineering side, you know, it's people who are really good problem solvers. You know, I think the thing that we've seen is over time, the tool, even within one tool set, it changes a lot from, you know, when you know, one year to the next. But the tools will inevitably change and things, but the, you know, that problem solving mindset, I think is the type of thing that, you know, allows you to adapt to all of the things that, you know, will be coming that we can't foresee right now.
Huge. And that problem solving mindset, how do you train that? Here's a challenge to the educators out there, right? Like,
and I think, you know, the thing we've seen is like Eric, you know, I'm just going to, I love being able to talk about other people as opposed to myself. But we do often get asked, like, you know, like, I want to direct something. And so, you know, like, what does it take to direct? Like, I'm going to work on this and then I'll eventually get my chance. And it's like the people who end up becoming good directors or good whatever, they just do it. They don't ask for permission. They, you know, it's like, it's built into them. Like, I got to tell the story, or I got to, you know, build this tool. And so I think that, you know, getting out there and doing whatever it is that you're passionate about and getting experience doing it will be the thing that ends up, you know, making you understand things much better, but it is also the thing that will probably get you hired too.
nice.
Because, you know, you'll actually really have an understanding of how hard it was to, you know, create that short film or to create whatever tool that you've developed, and you'll sort of have an understanding of what you would do next time. But we do get asked that a lot, and really the directors that we gravitate towards or creators that we gravitate towards are people who, you know, haven't asked for permission. They've just gone out and done it, and eventually you get better at it.
Nice. No, that's great insights. I get to there is another question that I'm going to help and support in answering a little bit in a moment, but my burning question, and as an educator and for educators out there listening as well, am I on the right track in terms of training students through different pipelines to document what they're learning for purposes of maybe someone else wanting to open up that file down the road and knowing what the hell to do with it? I know technical documentation is huge. My burning question for both of you is the importance of that relationship with knowledge transfer within your organizations, because I know it's tricky when everyone is set on creating, especially studios like Larry, like with Baobab.
Yeah.
So what do you both think about that? Is it something that is that you're paying attention to, that is of increasing importance in this time? Paul, do you want to lead or?
Yeah, I
Or
think
maybe Larry. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Sure.
put you on
No,
the
Paul,
spot.
go for it.
no, I'll go for it. Yeah, I think it doesn't matter if you're writing code or creating content. I think being able to communicate what you've done and the intent of what you've done, and maybe if there's some subtlety or details or inspiration or whatever else that you can document, that's enormously useful. The end product of whatever we create is one thing. It's always important to convey the intention behind it and any other information that you think's relevant for others. I'm not a huge believer on documentation for the sake of documentation, but absolutely when it's important to have additional information on something or details or things like that, it's just as important as the product itself.
Yeah, and I think I'll take just a slightly different flavor on this, which is just, documentation and being used to train others. I think that for us, and throughout my career, training has just become such a huge part of setting people up for success and not making them feel like they're floundering. And especially in a startup company, that is often the thing that is overlooked. You just give someone a computer and tell them to set it up and go. And that's, not, been my experiences from Pixar and DreamWorks. And, for us, interestingly, I think that's one of the things we never explicitly say that we're looking for that, but I think one of the things that I've noticed as a common thread amongst the people we've hired is that they love to train, to be there to help other people and to collaborate with other people. And so I feel like documentation is kind of one of the ways that we go about doing that. Like when you actually, whether it's a story, but I'm going to use code here just because but when you open up a code that's unreadable and like super compact but it really makes it hard for someone else to take over that code. And, so I think that having enough context that we can give people so that they can actually be successful at what they're doing when they need to review stuff, is so beneficial. And I think what's interesting is that the documentation these days takes on so many different forms because, like we have stuff in Google Docs, we actually have people recording videos of themselves because, they're now everyone's distributed. So we can't like walk over and show you what we're doing. But I think that desire to help other people out is the thing that, I think is really important for an organization to thrive. Now, the challenge of documentation is just that it gets out of date so quickly. And so, you have to find ways that what you're doing stays up with things. So to Paul's point, documenting everything just for the sake of documentation can actually have unintended consequences.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you both for that. I know we're wrapping up. There was a question that was pretty big, I think, which is, do you see the different forms of storytelling you're both engaged in working better for people with disabilities? My response in terms of that was to also send a link to explorations with technology and immersive sensory-based systems. I know Microsoft's been exploring this, other companies are exploring this. It's a little bit with the affordances of a technology question and the capacity for those technologies to afford different types of storytelling for a broad range of people with different types of abilities. Any thoughts on that from either of you? I've kind of answered it a bit broadly.
I think one of the things that's interesting about immersive technology is that there are more like levers at our disposal. So we can, ultimately when I say, hey, we can actually give you a unique story that's based on what the choices that you make with different types of disabilities, we have the option of delivering kind of unique content and stories that can, be beneficial. I think there's also been the opportunity to highlight the types of disabilities that people have, so people have more empathy. So you take a VR project like Notes on Blindness, and you really, you're able to put yourself into the shoes of someone who actually has a disability. And so I think specifically with VR, there's a lot of opportunities to be able to, whether it's through storytelling, or whether it's the way that storytelling is actually exposed to different people in different ways. And then, obviously in terms of creating, I think that that's a whole different realm to what you're saying, but I think there are a lot of potentials there. My guess is we've just scratched the surface of what's possible, though.
Yeah.
So I think there's clearly a lot more work that needs to be done. But I think as a platform, I think there's a lot of opportunities to address those things.
Yeah, and I'm thinking spatial audio as well within VR.
Yeah,
and
just
that
like
type of
the
navigation.
spatial audio is a great example where we, with spatialized audio, we really can do things differently than what you could do in sort of a traditional film, even with really fancy sound speakers and stuff.
Yeah. Paul, any?
No, I echo all those. I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm so proud to be in the technology world, is to see in general the technology, the impact that we've had on people who have disabilities. But I think, whether it's described audio or closed captioning or whatever the technology is, it's pretty amazing to see how we're able to allow everyone to enjoy content and storytelling in their own way, and that's pretty magical. So, I always love that about technology and the enablement that goes with it. I agree. I think we're just scratching the surface, and this whole area of personalization and real time should allow us to continue to deliver even more tailored experiences that for whatever audience, for whatever purpose, will be a richer experience.
Wow. A fantastic way to find closure here. I look forward to our next discussion on personalized real-time entertainment. Wow, that's a great setup, Paul. Thank you. And thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Larry, for taking the time to be with us today. Other burning questions you can probably send through the organizer of this session, and we'll see how we get to respond those. But for now, thanks everyone as well for attending this live summit. Wish we could see you. We can imagine that you're all there, and hope that this has been a learning experience for all of you, as it has for me. Thank you again, Paul and Larry, and thanks to Spark FX as well.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Spark.